was Hasidism, I think you alluded to this, exclusively an Eastern European phenomenon, and why was that? Could it have spread to Western Europe pre-Enlightenment, pre-Haskalah, and why didn't it?
That's a great question. I think there's two aspects. One has to do with history and geography, and one has to do with culture and spirituality. In terms of history and geography, most of the Jewish people at the time lived in Eastern Europe. That's where the majority of the Jewish people lived. And when I say majority, I don't only mean in quantity, I also mean in quality, meaning the greatest yeshivas, the greatest centers of academia, of scholarship, of study, of learning were in Eastern Europe. So it would be expected that new movements within the creative Jewish mind and Jewish world that sprung up from Torah movements would first of all come from Eastern Europe and would have adherents in Eastern Europe. The place was simply fertile for tremendous Jewish growth because there's sheer numbers in quantity and in quality. That's number one. Number two, I mean, at that time, I believe probably most of the Jewish people lived in that area. They lived in that region where the Baal Shem Tov lived and the students lived. I would say most of the Jewish world. Now, there's another element, and that is the uniqueness of those places. Those places were struck very, very hard in the era, in the time before the Baal Shem Tov. The poverty there was probably greater than in any other place in the world. The suffering of the Jewish people, the anti-Semitism, even though it existed all over Europe. And of course, in the Middle Ages, France and Germany were no paradises. Let's remember that. Let's remember where the Crusades came from and how much French Jewry suffered. But in that era of the Baal Shem Tov, the greatest poverty and suffering, I believe, was in Eastern Europe. So there was a certain openness of vulnerability and of fertility for the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. Another component is that I think many regions, there was a certain susceptibility to the spiritual message of the Baal Shem Tov. The culture of the people, the openness of the people, the lifestyle of the people, I think it made them more open to the perspectives of the Hasidic movement, which were so much focused on understanding cosmic oneness, spiritual oneness, focusing on meditation, on mindfulness, on the romantic and loving relationship between God and humanity, between God and the Jewish people, and focusing extremely, very heavily on the meaning of the soul and what the soul is. I think in those places there was an acute sensitivity to these ideas, even more than in other locations.